And just like that, the autumn series is done and dusted for 2024, as is International 15-a-sides rugby, aside from a couple of smatterings here and there. I'm Nick Vasiliev. Welcome to the Drop to Kickoff. And before we do our headlong dive into the Wallabies and discussing the Wallabies in a bit more detail, we thought let's bring on a very, very special guest from the podcast, a long-time fan on this side of the world for us. Always the person we go to when it comes to news in the Americas and everything in between, but also a good opportunity to talk about just an outside voice looking in on not just the autumn series, but also the Wallabies 2027, the World Cup. I have the trusty Nathan Williamson, first of all, by my side, who's literally just come off a stint in the sevens shift. Always nice when we get a trophy in Dubai, isn't it, Nathan?
It's a happy hunting ground for him, so it's nice to wake up with a win, isn't it?
Always nice to wake up with a win. And of course, the guest in question is the one and only Paul Tait, America's Oval himself. Paul, happy afternoon from beautiful Brazil.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And there's a lot to tackle, isn't there?
It's such a strange time. I feel like if you were to ask the question, when's the best time to watch rugby, I feel like right now, because it feels like such a volatile, competitive environment. It genuinely feels like anyone can beat anyone, which is the right sort of problem to have if you are a fan in any way, shape or form. And so to kick us off, we're going to talk about, there's been so many games that have played out over the autumn series, both on multiple different levels. Who has been the player, in our opinion, of this autumn series that has really stood out? And I know, Paul, I'm going to throw you under the bus first because it is such a massive question, but I think it's a good opportunity to shout out a particular player who might have gone under the radar.
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious names first, of course, Peter Stiff du Toit, I mean, very, very good. And Antoine Dupont, very good. Nothing, they explain themselves. I guess names less expected, perhaps, are Wallace Satidi was probably, for me, the pick of the All Blacks. And, I mean, this is a rookie, so that's quite scary, I think, for the Pumas fans and Wallabies fans. Other names I would mention, Caleb Muntz, of course, was just everything. Like Wales, that win Fiji had, I think that was on his shoulders. Obviously, not entirely his own, but his performance was one of the truly all-time great Fijian fly half matches. And the other name which comes to mind is the Georgian fullback. I'm going to say it wrong, but David Niniashvili. Those of us who follow the top 14 are not surprised. As a person who's covering and involved in South American stuff, I've seen him quite a bit because he's playing with or against Pumas and other players. But look, this guy can really do it all. You guys probably remember his involvement against the Wallabies too, but against Tonga, that match was 0-0 for a long time. Georgia ultimately got away with it, and this guy was the difference. And I mean, Georgia also were very unlucky not to have come away with a result against Italy. So those are the names which come to my mind. From Pumas, I don't think there's anyone truly who stands out compared to the Rugby Championship. The level was possibly dropped a bit, but Juan Martin Gonzalez is the best forward of the year. Tomas Albanos, the best back. And then from other countries, I mean, I was quite impressed by Wright from the Wallabies. I would say he was for me the Australia's player for the November series, if not beyond that, for the year. And I mean, I could probably say a few other players, but they're going to be more Springboks and, Marcus Smith from England, perhaps, because or else I'm just going to be naming more guys who have already won awards. So
you can really go like into depth. When I kind of threw this left field question, I knew it was such a hard answer because I'm not surprised in classic Paul fashion. You've hit us with a whole team because there have been so many fantastic players. I'm so glad you're highlighting Georgia. Tapetsatska, we mentioned it in the podcast last week. ever since he scored that try in against the Wallabies. I mean, was aware of him beforehand because we saw him in the World Cup, but it really just made me go, oh my God, Georgia have really got some good backs now. They are looking phenomenal. It's always been the eternal question around how they're going to, if and when you incorporate them into higher levels of European competitiveness. But my God, they are just a sheer joy to watch. It's the actual love and joy that comes out of Georgian rugby is amazing. Nathan, throw you onto the which is there. I know we talked about a couple of players highlighted last week, but good opportunity to talk about a bunch of others. Who else has stood out to you outside of the Wallabies?
I mean, just from looking from a pure perspective of like who started against the Wallabies. I mean, Sammy Tuipulotu, I thought was excellent, particularly that game last week at Murrayfield. But in terms of the player of the autumn series, like I can't go past Tait. He was just amazing. Like I haven't seen and been sort of following him since that sort of growth in the Chiefs, and I haven't seen a player, particularly the past 12 months, just keep taking those leaps. Like he was dominant for the Chiefs. He then steps up for New Zealand during that rugby championship, and he just keeps getting better and better and better. And it just sort of continues this streak of New Zealand creating this unbelievable pathway for these back rows to come through and just dominate. Like this is a guy who was, still fighting for a starting spot for the Chiefs at the start of the year, and he's just come out and absolutely dominated. So if you look for your player of the autumn series, I'm with Paul. It's tough to go past him, really.
It feels like in terms of the most complete performance as best you can have, he really stood out. So I'm not surprised to hear that, and to hear that when it comes to players who really stood out this autumn, he really did leave a strong impression.
It's amazing to think like this guy hadn't started a Super Rugby game before April. Like he debuted off the bench in round 3, and he's now maybe a top 5, top 10 back row in the world. Like his rise has been meteoric, and it's been incredible to watch.
Absolutely. So I think this is a good way for us to dive straight into the autumn series at large. I think this has been one of the most fascinating periods of rugby in a long time, just because not just at international level, even at tier 2 level, or whatever you call the levels where you see the emerging nations coming through. Just in general, it feels like there are teams that are emerging left, right, and centre. From the Netherlands somehow grabbing a win over Chile, which I'm still stunned that happened, to Zimbabwe going undefeated in the entire year, to Argentina putting on some of the best performances that I've seen ever, and grabbing a first ever win over the Wallabies, the All Blacks, and the Springboks in a rugby championship. There's been so much to celebrate and enjoy, and there's been so much fantastic rugby. Paul, from your perspective and from where you're looking, I feel like this is the best time ever to be a rugby fan, isn't it? It's just phenomenal, the rugby we're getting.
I agree. I think that the competitiveness across the board has risen. Very, very. There are a number of countries who could identify. The results, not only in terms of who won and lost, but how the rugby was played as well. So just Felipe Contepomi as an example, he says he's not interested in results, just they're interested in how they play. That's what they want. And that obviously did come to be during this year, because the rugby that they played, they went from scoring 1 try in both of their prior wins over the All Blacks to scoring 4. They set a new record for points scored in New Zealand against the All Blacks, as an example. Obviously, they came back from 17 points down against Wallabies and Springboks in both those matches. So those were 2 talking points for sure for me. But in terms of other countries, there's definitely, let's say the script is being rewritten or torn up. And we're looking now at obviously already at the next World Cup. And it's going to be interesting not only to see what unfolds, but also that it's no longer such a case of we want to be playing that team. So I think there is a great unknown involved. Like Georgia, for example, Are they better than Japan now? It looks to be the case, yes. They obviously played them in Japan and won that match. USA, of course, with a big disappointment because they didn't make the World Cup last time. That was, for me, it was bittersweet because Chile obviously were the ones who got there instead, but USA could have still qualified but didn't. And so at the moment, for me, when I look at all the Tier 2 teams, I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, Samoa didn't play because of financial problems, corruption issues with the union. Maybe there's a governance issue there that they need to be governed from, I don't know, Auckland or Canberra. I don't know. Just an example. Maybe they can't do it themselves good enough. You know what I mean? And Tonga just haven't been playing well. They had a bit of a Canada year this year. So when I say that, I'm not only talking about the results, I'm saying that Canada's long-term issue has been that some of their top players just haven't been playing for them. And this year, if you look at who played for Tonga compared to the World Cup, it's quite noticeable. They just couldn't get them playing for them. There are issues of players not being paid. But yeah, the Chilean loss against the Netherlands, which you mentioned, I have never seen such a lack of humility from a South American team before. The Chileans looked as if they expected to win and didn't really try to win until it was too late. They had an issue where the replacement tight head had to pull out, so they didn't have a replacement tight head for that match. But I mean, they came off a record win over Canada the prior week, and the Netherlands were pumped up. It was their only match, and they delivered. They were competitive where they needed to be, and Chile were just literally were caught out. I don't think it'll happen again.
It's sometimes you have like a humbling result, and unfortunately, in the case of Australian rugby, we're very familiar with them at the moment because we've been subjected to a few. Nathan, I know that we've watched a lot of rugby this year. It's been a kind of a real just conveyor belt of quality this autumn series, and I do think that when it comes to the apple cart, at least at the top level, it previously, of course, that you do have, your likes of your New Zealands, your South Africas, and of course France and Ireland as the current teams leading the way. But I'll tell you what, Scotland is looking very, very strong. The Wallabies feel like they're a bit of a dark horse right now because they've really answered a lot of questions in terms of the Lions series next year, and even other teams outside of that.
Absolutely, and I think like this what we call a spring tour, but more fair to say at the end of year two, it's just shown that just how close everyone is. Like, I think I can't remember who sort of said it, but it was the best example. Like the top 4 teams are probably more good than fun, or great than fun, while the 4 to sort of everyone down is more fun than great. And whilst that's sort of a nice analogy of how they all play, it also shows just anyone can sort of beat anyone on their day. Like that's the sort of, particularly with the style of rugby that's now being played by your likes of Scotland, who are got a freakish backline of your Russells, Vandermeers, Darcy Grahams, and that's that Hugh Pilato centre combination. You look at the way, again, Australia's been playing, the counter-attacking style there. Like there's just been a lot of sort of growth within those nations that were getting sort of tailed up a little over the past 12 to 18 months. And I guess you're seeing that across the board, whether it's in that sort of tier 1 or those tier 2 nations. Like Paul mentioned the USA, like they were, let's face it, they were terrible in that Pacific Nations Cup, but then they come out and, go 3 wins on the trot. That the Chile defeat you're talking about, I think just shows how that sort of second tier of European rugby just keeps getting better. When you look at Spain coming through as well, even though they got beat by Fiji, they've, sevens programs kicked on to make a final in Dubai. You look at sort of, again, the way Georgia's played, the way Portugal continues to develop and the opportunities they had in July. Even look at, I know they're not playing, but even like the way Russia sort of develops in that background as well. Like once they get their sort of program together and they're actually allowed to sort of have meaningful matches, like they're going to be great. Like it's just shown that level, not only within the sort of elite level, that tier 1 is just getting sort of shorter and shorter between your top and bottom, but that sort of that gap between tier 1 and tier 2, like it's just those lines are just completely blurred now, in the sense that when you're getting these games, you're going in there with the honest opinion of, hey, anything can happen here on the day. And even if those sort of games where you think you know the result, like it's at least going to be exciting rugby, even though we like to say, like, oh, what's the difference between quality rugby and it's just that little line on the equator. Like, you can't say that anymore, because it's just the blending of that has just been amazing, with just how close the competition has become between just basically every nation. So I think this last sort of month of action has really just heightened that, and really going to set up a really exciting next couple of years when you start putting sort of World Cup qualification and that expanded World Cup format into sort of further magnifying.
A good question to ask for you both, actually, off the back of this, is because it feels like it's been such a shift since 12 months ago, when we were when the final whistle blew at Stade de France, and maybe it's. Do we think that the actual 4-year cycle, you always hear about the talk of the 4-year cycle, or the progression into the World Cup and the qualification of the World Cup, teams putting all of their energy to qualify for the World Cup, and you either succeed or you fail. Do you feel like we're seeing that cycle have more of an impact than ever on general development, both at the top in terms of the strongest nations, but also more specifically in the progression of other teams coming through the ranks?
Oh, certainly. So if you look at who Uruguay selected at the World Cup, so for example, take a look at their team that played against Namibia as an example. When was that? October last year. So at the World Cup, obviously. Now you go to November, just finished, and there was a notable change of the guard. Some of it was literally because of merit, and a lot of it was selection oriented because of what they thought they needed. So they had the same players starting all the matches at fly half. For example, Felipe Echeverri, he wasn't involved at all. In November, he was the starting player from the July test matches. His replacement at the World Cup was Felipe Berchesi, who was the guy who kicked the goals for the famous win over Fiji at the other World Cup. So they actually had rookies and under 20 player playing, and fly half's just one example of what happened. I mean, if you remember the Jacko King from the World Cup, Manuel Aidao, he didn't play in November. Quite a few players, some were injury, but more often than not, some of them were simply went to the US to re-sign for new Major League Rugby deals and didn't play. So they fielded a very different team. And this has definitely kick-started their new cycle. They're going to be playing in the World Cup qualifiers. We're still waiting on the dates, but it's probably September from what we're hearing. So they're going to have July home series. No indication yet on who they're playing at the stage. We know England touring 2 matches against Argentina, and Argentina will play Chile in their 3rd match. But that's all we have at the stage. Could be Spain touring. Could be Romania, but we're hearing Ireland are going to be playing away to Romania and Georgia. So don't know if that's going to work or not, because obviously it's pretty hard to do both. But having said that, Georgia will play the Springboks away. So the Uruguayan side, they've just lost as well. If you saw their match against Romania, they scored 2 tries. They're very classy tries. The first was scored by Gaston Mieres. Played 3 World Cups. He's now 35, and this was his last match. So he's gone too now. So their entire back line have gone from being a mixture of veterans and let's say semi-experienced players to now being more players with little test experience. So all less than 15 caps. But that's fine, because they have their high performance system and it's working. We know it's working because Peñarol have won the Super Rugby Americas twice. And obviously Uruguay are the team to beat for the South American one qualifying spot for the World Cup. And Uruguay have gotten results against teams from many regions. So you can discredit an away tour series over Namibia, but when they did that, that was a very big deal for them. And now they'd be expected to go there and do it quite comfortably, probably. But it's for them. We're looking very much as a case of, yes, the new cycle is well and truly started. Chile are similar as well. But neither country really actually used so many players this year. So that's interesting because even though they've changed the guard, they changed it early.
Which really makes the next couple of years look very exciting as that guard builds towards the likes of Australia in 2027. Natho, I'm really curious to hear what you think. I mean, you've been keeping an eye not just on the Super Rugby, not just on the internationals, but even on the sevens and stuff like that. It's been so interesting to see not just those pathways coming through in the 15s level, but also at even at a sevens level, like you mentioned, Spain literally just made a final in Dubai.
But and particularly when you look at that sort of South American lens as well, when you have Uruguay back in the men's competition as well. Again, they look strong over the weekend, getting a couple of upsets. Like now you're sort of seeing a bit more exposure. You sort of couple that with what's happening with around World Rugby, trying to get more sort of top line games for those countries who are just about to start World Cup qualifications in the next 12 to 18 months. You now sort of see that opportunity, as Paul said, of being able to blood these young players and these sort of comparative rookies to what was at the 23 World Cup, and not only sort of giving them that opportunity, but quality opportunities to really sort of allow the development at test level and just sort of start this growth process. So by the time you get to sort of late 26 or a World Cup, they're not being thrown into the deep end with little or no experience. Like they're going to have 20 to 25 caps under their belt. They're going to have an idea of their own game and what sort of works in that regard. So I think when you look at from that lens, like you're right, it's a really exciting time. And I guess you look across the board as well, and you're seeing an interesting blend across those top nations. Like you look at South Africa, haven't really sort of changed up their squad for the 23 World Cup, whereas you look at Ireland and they threw Sam Prendergast into the last two games to really give him sort of extra time. The Kiwis sort of went for a mixture with Satiti coming in, but had guys like Ruben Love go over who didn't get a single game. Like Scotland seemed more settled than ever, whilst France have sort of gone for a mixture where they threw a top line squad out, but know that next year when they come down to New Zealand, there's probably going to be a mix of that sort of those like past 20 squads that have dominated the world champs in South Africa over the past 3 or 4 years. So like it's fascinating to see what team is going for that sort of youth over experience model with 27 in mind, whilst others just seem like they're looking for that, keep that success rolling, and you can just hopefully like blood players through the sort of time and hopefully they sort of get up to speed. So it's a kind of fascinating arms race between the sort of nations of how do you want to do it? Do you want to go for the youth option, or do you just keep the experience and hope for the best?
Yeah, you've got to decide when to make the change, don't you? So, I mean, South Africa, you said they haven't. People argue, but they change a lot of players from one week to the next. But as I interpret it, South Africa are under the New Zealand requirement, which is must win every match.
It's so true.
Right. Like Australia, Argentina, they don't have that. The expectation and the fan pressure is not the same. France, it's not the same. A lot of people are harsh on France based on missing players for tours, but the reality is that they are from a different world. So rugby doesn't have a universal world, so to speak. So, I mean, Super Rugby is the world for Australia and New Zealand, obviously, but France, they've got a domestic competition, which is just heads and shoulders above the rest. And many players obviously are playing there until late June. Sometimes the final is in July itself. They need a break. Argentina have the exact same thing to deal with because their players are spread far and wide. So, I mean, for example, Marcos Crema didn't have a break, went from playing for Clermont, who were eliminated early because their season wasn't the best, to fronting straight up in the July matches, then captaining in the away match against Uruguay. So, he, when he got the injury he got, it was kind of like, okay, this is even the hard men need a break. So, I think watching different expectations though across the different tier 1 teams is telling. So some people do take the cautious approach, but a lot of them, again, will be very harsh based on one loss. But thankfully, for most, it's not a requirement to win every match.
As a kind of a final point for both of you on the autumn series in general, like, I think we're all in agreement. This is the best time to be a fan. It's great. The rugby is fantastic. What do we do to ensure that progression continues? And this is probably part of a two-part question, because we'll come back to this a bit later with the talking of the format of the Rugby World Cup and the fact that more teams will be included in that. But, I mean, obviously there is, of course, the mid-series tests. I mean, as much as the Puritan Australian fan in me loved the 3-match test series, I cannot deny that how good it was to play those 2 tests against Wales and then have Georgia turn up for a fantastic match. And even in South Africa with Portugal offering lots of fight, which was fantastic to do. What do we need to do to keep this progression going? We don't want it to go static. Is it a case of just even more games against top-tier opposition, or is it a case of, or are we looking to generally? Is it country by country? Is that the best way to take it forward, or is it a case of we have a model that is clearly working, stick with it?
We have a model which is clearly flawed. The scattering of the world powers often is used to fill in the cracks. So, unfortunately, rugby does not have something which you could say you could use to generally say the sport is global. We can say the sport's very popular in a variety of markets, but global, where is the Oceania Cup? Where is the Europe Cup? Why don't we have these? Well, there are simple reasons for that, but the Autumn Nations Series is being used as a prelude to the Nations Championship, which World Rugby are pushing and is going to start, and that is going to end Georgia having a test match against the Wallabies, because every match, as you guys will be aware of this format, every match will be between the 12 from that division. So the Wallabies will only be facing Six Nations teams outside of the Rugby Championship. That's what it means. Pumas likewise. This is not what we want. When I say we, I'm obviously speaking for myself, but I'm saying we for people who are focused on, to some extent, tier 2. Again, I would like to have a Confederations Rugby Cup. I live in Brazil. It's a big deal if Brazil qualify for the Soccer Confederations Cup. I would like to have that. That would be the goal. Have it the year before the World Cup. So Australia, for example, would be the host in 2025 or 2026. Let's say 2025. So Six Nations champions Ireland. It's going to be the Australia are in as the next hosts. South Africa are in as the reigning World Cup champs. South American champions, North American champions. So we got Argentina, you got USA, Asian champions, Japan. Africa champions would be Namibia in this case. And so, I mean, that's Ireland, Argentina, USA, Japan, Namibia, New Zealand would be Oceania champs, South Africa, Australia. 2 pools, a semi-final round and final round. That's something which I would like to see happen. But I'm dreaming, because and World Rugby elections have just confirmed this. The person who's elected will not do anything to shake up the system. They're going to go full with the Nations Championship model. So the chances of seeing something like Wallabies versus USA is going to be, if it's a cash grab before a November tour. It's unfortunate. That's where we're at. Unfortunately, at the moment, a lot of unions are under big financial problems. So obviously Australia is a good example. You guys will be fine. You got the Lions, you got the World Cup. you're gonna be totally fine. The question is, what do you do about it when the circus has left the town? Because last time you really messed it up with your what was it called, the Australian domestic competition that had the Stingrays and so on. But you know, you've lost the Rebels. You're at the point where you're down to 4 teams, and that's actually not a bad number. But I mean, Argentina had Jaguares. Now they've got 3 teams in the Super Rugby Americas. That's going to keep increasing. So I mean, the level obviously is not the same, but that's really not important, because what's important is the production line. And Gonzalez, Oviedo, Ruiz, there's a host of players who went from Super Rugby Americas to professional contracts, and importantly to now beating everybody when they're playing for Argentina. So again, there are different needs from different countries. The Nations Championship is just a cash grab. They want to have a final at the end of the year. I understand the logic, but it's something which is good for South Africa, not something that's good for Africa. It's something that's good for New Zealand, not something good for Oceania. But I mean, for example, what would you like to do? Would you be happy seeing an Oceania Cup Wallabies to go take on Fiji and Suva, for example? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of doing it. And I think from an Australian perspective, like that idea of being the world game gets thrown around a lot here, because again, our competition is very domestic focused when it comes to the prevalent sports we have here. But you're right. In the reality of the situation is this Nation Cups is just sort of designed to prop up the money, prop up the banks of those big nations. And it's not a coincidence over the past couple of weeks we've seen we've seen those countries record significant losses. And yes, whilst a lot of that has to do with a World Cup and not being able to host the same amount of test matches as a result of that, like that's still a damning thing. And with the issues that the Rebels have is something which is England's faced, basically every club competition has faced except for France and Japan. So it's not exactly saying that the current system we have is working, and that the Nations Cup's not going to fix that. Like particularly when you look at, if you have to say like, a rugby final, what's supposed to crown the best of the best will happen in Qatar. Like you're all about you're saying the choir but out loud there. Like it's just a cash grab. Yeah, and absolutely. I think from an Australian perspective as well, like that idea of a Pacifics Cup where we, in the past we've thrown like an Australia A side out there, and yes, while that's nice for development, like you want to see the Wallabies play in Suva, or even I know for a fact if you got Fiji out at Parramatta, or I don't know, you got Fiji out to Newcastle perhaps, like you're going to draw a crowd. There's been enough.
I think that's what's happening, is it not? Plan for next year, am I right?
I think
for the Lions series, is it not going to be Fiji play in Newcastle?
Have you heard of that? Yes, it is. Heard that. Yes, it is. It is playing, and I mean, there's a lot of Fijians. I mean, I live up here now. There's a lot of Fijians up here. I mean, I literally played against. I literally was playing in a rugby, like Friday night rugby comp, and I suddenly found myself face to face with a former Fijian international number 8. Who clobbered me beautifully, and I went, "Oh, dang!"
That's the point. Like, there's so many like Fijian, Samoans, Tongans around. Like for an example, like for those that sort of follow the international league game, like they had a stadium of 30,000 people when it was Australia Tonga. It was 25,000 Tongans.
Yes.
So definitely. Can you imagine if you had Tonga actually flying with their star players? Got all their talent that they can call upon, and they did for last year's World Cup, back into playing a game. Say, look, it'd be nice to hold that game on the island there, or
right.
I know like Suva probably is the closest thing they have to facilities, and even that for Test rugby might not be up to World Rugby standard. But even if you were to host it in, go to Auckland or go to Sydney, host it there as that almost in that mini tournament style, like. You would get a plethora of those Fijian, Samoan, Tongans fans just go out and sort of get behind it and make it an amazing atmosphere. So I think that would be a no-brainer when you look at what's the right format.
It would still be a home game for Fiji and Tonga. It would, even if it's in Parramatta, it
Oh,
would still be a home game.
absolutely. The Eden Park match for Samoa Fiji in 2011 World Cup. That's all you need to know. I would love to see a Oceania Cup involving Japan plus the obvious five: Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, and that doubling as World Cup qualifiers. Obviously, they're all going to qualify as 6 of the 24 teams. So let's make this interesting as using it as for World Cup seedings. Why not? The same thing with Europe. Every European Cup, 6 nations. That's how you get Georgia involved. You can't get Georgia involved through other means because this isn't a sporting competition. It's something which is obviously signed by the 6 nations themselves, and you can't magically just, okay, let's expand. Let's have promotion relegation. It's a no, as much as we want it.
It's so fascinating, and I love that there's like this contrast between how much joy that we've had over watching this Autumn Nations series, but also that let's be honest here, it's the financial discussions in the background which is driving where we go, and it's very curious to see how it's going to affect the state of rugby going forward. Because at the end of the day, us as fans, we just want to watch rugby, and on top of it, to see more countries playing rugby has brought me so much joy. I want to see more Chiles. I want to see more Georgia playing rugby. I want to see all of that. It's not just the usual status quo of Australia playing New Zealand. There's a joy in international rugby now that is so palpable, and it's something definitely to watch. I think this is a good time actually now, Paul, because there's one thing we always love doing when you come on the show is checking in, getting the pulse on the rugby in the Americas. But it's definitely a place that we've been watching, a lot more, especially ever since Argentina joined the Rugby Championship. But get on 12, 13 years ago, and just seeing the progression of them. But not just them. I mean, looking at the internationals over the course of this year. I mean, on the men's side at least, the less said about Canada, the better. I don't think. Everyone's saying how bad Wales is, but Canada is basically hold my beer because it's been a rough couple of years for Canada. Similarly, until this autumn series, the US has also been very hit and miss, but then they suddenly come out and pull up a couple of great wins. And of course, I know you've talked about it on the pod before, but Argentina have thrown a lot of resources and support into the likes of Chile and Uruguay and even Brazil. Even your home country has been playing a lot more rugby. How has things progressed? What is the general mood in terms of rugby in the Americas right now?
It's very good down south, and it's not so optimistic up north. And World Rugby agreed to that. So if you would look at what they have done for the allocation of qualifying spots, you're gonna be very annoyed if you're a Chilean supporter, and very happy if you're a USA Eagles supporter, because they've literally made it so 5 of the 6 from the Pacific Nations Cup are at the World Cup, and the one who's not, let's say it's Canada, who are wooden spoon heavy favorites, they will then play the South American number 2. So it's looking like going to be Chile against Canada again. Difference this time is it won't be a straight elimination. Brazil are a team I wouldn't say on the rise. I would say that their peak was probably what was the 2006 to 2019, 2016 to 2019 years under the America's Rugby Championship. They defeated the USA, they defeated Canada. They were always beating Chile every time during that period. Now it's the opposite, because Chile was literally amateur then, and they put in their high performance system, and it worked. Chile has a successful school system. School is the factory for Australian rugby. It's a factory for a lot of countries, including Chile in this situation. Argentina, the factories, the clubs. This is one of the reasons why Argentina doesn't have their own massive professional competition, because they're worried about the clubs disappearing. But just so you have an idea, there are multiple former Pumas from the Rugby Championship years who are now head coaches at their local club. This is stark contrast to Wales, for example. Wales have been coached by New Zealanders for all but 2 years over the last 2 decades. In fact, longer than that. So 1999 was Graham Henry. Then it was Henson the next World Cup. Both went on to be All Blacks coaches, of course. Other than that, it's always been Gatland and, sorry, who was the guy? I can't recall.
Wayne Pivac.
Wayne Pivac.
Yes,
Yeah.
Pivac. So they're all Kiwis. They had their own Welsh coach for 2-year period. That's it. And look, Sam Warburton, why isn't he a rugby coach? That's what happens. That's a common problem that's happening with the Six Nations in general. Brian O'Driscoll, he's not a rugby coach. These guys go from rugby to TV. So Joe Marler's just retired. He's probably going to be a TV personality based on, the man he is. So in Argentina, it's not really like that. There are guys, of course, who are on TV, but it's very common to go and give things back. So Argentina is in the best position that it has ever been in at the end of the first year of a World Cup cycle. Now, why do I say that? Well, the results speak for themselves. These results came with heavy rotation. So we went from Petty and Lavanini and Alemano as the 3 second rowers from the past 3 World Cups. No one else had a shot. It was those 3. The last one, Rubioli went, but he was the 4th option. He didn't really get much of a shot. Nice starting. Him and Molina. Molina's from Super Rugby Americas. Again, you can look at many different positions. Many guys have come through this year. Established names have either gone or they're no longer guaranteed. Like Pablo Matera is no longer guaranteed starter. That gives you some idea. Oviedo's now.
That's insane to me, by the way.
Right.
Because just how good a player Matera is. Like he's been such a face internationally for Los Pumas, and just to hear that to see the ranks coming through is insane to me. It does feel like, especially from the outside looking in, there was clear planning with Cheika that he would be that kind of that smash in and go and get that real injection that he's very, very good at, with a clear plan in place for Contaponi to come and really put his own stamp on it.
He's done that, yeah. I totally agree. So they've recycled and changed many of the players already. And the key point in this is that this would not have been possible in prior cycles, because with Jaguares as an example, priority was firmly on them. You had to be exceptionally well to be selected ahead of one of them. So Figaggio, for example, the tight head, he was selected, but Imhoff wasn't. It was like, this is ludicrous, but that's what happened. So now they're all, the guys who were Jaguares have all dispersed. Super Rugby Americas has continued the production line, and they're also dispersed. So we've gone from having, in some situations, 1 player for a position to now having 3, 4. So very good. They've got a fly half at last. They're not playing a winger at 10 this year anymore. But I mean, I'm not so critical of Carreras, because look, he was the 10 in Wellington this year for the win there. I mean, it's just Albanos is a 10. So very good. Pumas will continue. There's no reason to think that they're going to have a flop year or a flop cycle. They should be competitive for 2027. They should be contenders. There's a lot to go, obviously. We don't know yet, but and they are inspirational. Argentina, they're inspirational to their neighbors. They're rugby fans from Colombia who love Los Pumas, as an example. So same kind of thing. You'd see someone in Papua New Guinea with a Kangaroos rugby league shirt or a State of Origin, whatever. It's kind of like that. Obviously not the same extent because it's not embedded, but this is early in the process in terms of South American rugby. It's just going to get better and better. Chile will be in the World Cup again. Uruguay will be in the World Cup again. Brazil don't have the junior system to be an instant hit like Chile were an instant hit, because literally Chile, their planning was to qualify for 2027. Their planning was never to qualify for 2023, but they did. They did. What they did, it was pretty simple. They identified the top players. You had to be aged around 24. If you were older, you were basically discarded. So Martin Sigurden, the captain, he's just one of many of those guys. And with Salkman, the difference is between Salkman and an Argentine side is that getting professional contracts abroad is not so easy. So But some of them do. Most of them Major League Rugby. Some of them in the Serie A, which is the Italian league. But look, these are very promising signs for South America. North America, it's hard. We no longer have a star name like Samu Manoa or Jamie Cudmore, US or Canada, players like that playing in top competitions. So it's a hard one. I think that USA will qualify from the Pacific Nations Cup. I think Canada will probably enter rapid charge. Interestingly, is that Chile's loss to the Netherlands changes quite a bit, because the Netherlands, if they are a candidate, and the team standing in their way is going to be that bottom spot, because it'll be rapid charge. So it's Canada ultimately in their way. So, we're looking at multiple plausible newcomers at the next World Cup,
which is really exciting and really awesome that it's that continuous growth is coming out of coming out of the Americas, that we'll see it, at least in South America. Looking forward, I mean, a kind of a key question I want to ask is, Super Rugby Americas looks to have really done a lot. It looks to have really turned, in the past, in the past you had the Jaguares, and now it seems to be building on and building that all in-house in that competition itself. Is it a case of, because there's going to be more teams added, there's going to be more stuff happens as it grows? Will that, because I mean, obviously Super Rugby has been down this path before, where it changed formats, it added too many teams, it created a situation where people were turned away from the competition because there were 7 tables required to see how the competition works, which was just idiotic, or it made some teams a lot less competitive. Obviously, we're nowhere near that with Super Rugby Americas right now, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that teams like Chile and Uruguay and even Paraguay can actually have those competitive international teams and continue to grow. What does the outlook look like if you are a rugby fan in the Americas?
It's promising. So when it started, Uruguay was supposed to have 2 teams. They cut that to 1 for financial reasons. They are not. They're not ready for 2 teams probably, but I would like them to have 2 teams sooner rather than later. The difference between Uruguay that compared to probably all the other countries is that 2 teams would be in the same location. It's Montevideo only. It's the only city. And if you travel to Uruguay, you understand that pretty quickly. Santiago in Chile obviously has Salkman. There's a city. They say it's in the south, but on a map, it's not really the south. It's called Concepcion. That's supposed to be the market for a new team. There's no time frame on that, but we've been hearing that for a number of years. Argentina is getting a team in Tucumán now. They're going to be starting Tarucas in the new season. Tucumán's a hotbed. They've hosted the All Blacks in the past, for example, hosted France, packed. I'm talking amateur days, obviously, packed stadium. Many big names are from there. Nicolas Sanchez, Thomas Arbanos, Gonzalo Garcia. Could go on. They're from Tucumán, so there's already a production line in place. The team is officially going to be like Argentina's northwest, because they actually want to disassociate from the historical team, which is the Oranges, Naranjas. So that's the decision that they've made. Rosario, which is Argentina's 3rd largest city, is next in line. They were actually possibly entering this year, but they decided we don't want to rush it. We need another year. So they're going to enter. Paraguay, I don't really think are realistic to have another team. Brazil, likewise. And Paraguay is specifically dependent on Argentines. But they're actually taking quite of a Tonga, Samoa approach. And it's not really fair. But point I'm making is that they are nationalizing players. So the Paraguay captain now, for example, Amarisha, he's from Argentina. And they're actively doing what they can to get them. But it hasn't had an effect at this stage, so the level hasn't risen. Brazil still notably better at this point, but there are sufficient Argentine players for the level to maintain what it is. The difference is that from Super Rugby, you're looking at a pool of 100 players to select for Wallabies, for example. Super Rugby Americas, you're going to be looking at 5 for Los Pumas. And it's not from 3 teams either, because again, there are players from Argentina and all the teams. Some of them more than others, like Peñarol from Uruguay, they don't want foreigners. They just get a few of them for positions of greatest need. But again, if you go back to 2007, you'll be shocked to see just how dominant Buenos Aires was in Argentine rugby. There were only 3 guys from Los Pumas roster who were not from Buenos Aires. Now the team is entirely different. So you can select the whole back line now with no one from Buenos Aires if you want. Very changed. And so unearthing players from these different places, it's just going to give more and more resources. They're not going to run thin. And the level of the competition is not, as I said, isn't high enough for that to be really a factor. Because, Super Rugby Americas, it's not Pro D2, it's not the French second division level. It's below that. Major League Rugby likewise. But Super Rugby Americas, I say, is superior to Major League Rugby.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it's considering that the amount of talent that there is out there, you're seeing it at an international level that there is teams coming through the ranks here, and it's definitely one to watch. Just seeing a competition expanding and growing, and of course the inevitable goal of, if you are teams outside of Argentina, is to have all of them be locally sourced professional players is definitely something to be excited about. Before we let you go, Paul, I mean, we would love to hear your thoughts, opinions, and perspectives on the Wallabies, and more specifically the Lions tour, which is coming up, because obviously the Lions, this is an event that always really happens. Of course, there's been no shortage of chat around the Lions, not just going to South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, but also doing a trip to Argentina. That would probably be something that they really should consider to start doing. And of course, they do have a warm-up game against Argentina as well. How do you feel looking not just at the Wallabies from their spring tour in general as an outsider looking in, but where they all sit in the context of this upcoming Lions tour?
Wallabies are in a good position, not a great position, but they're in a good position. Wallabies played well against England, played well against Ireland, even though they didn't win that one. Obviously played very well against Wales. So, I mean, it's a 3 out of 4 for the tour. The game against Scotland wasn't the best, but overall, I think the competitiveness of the Wallabies will be better. The Lions cannot think that they're going to go win 3-0. Some people will argue that they will, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think it will be a competitive series. The match against Argentina, it's going to be in June. Too early for all the players to be available, so it's going to depend on a lot for that, based on who's available and who's not. But look, the Lions series is great, but one key point missing from it is there's no rugby world rankings on the line. So for Argentina, it doesn't matter. For Australia, it doesn't matter. So you guys are going to pack out the stadiums. Everyone's going to be excited. It's going to be a great way of getting ready for the next World Cup.
Definitely is one to consider. Nathan, I know that we'll obviously be talking about this when we do a final episode in a couple of days' time. But I wouldn't mind your initial thoughts as well on not just on how you feel about Argentina and the Lions, but also just that result from the weekend with Ireland and the Wallabies.
And from an Australian perspective, that Ireland one was always seen as that, all right, if you're going to compete against the Lions, how are you going to do against their best side? If you can't be competitive against Ireland, then forget about it. And I think that's what we saw. Whilst it wasn't a win, it was competitiveness. And I think that's the theme of this last 4 weeks from an Australian perspective is, Paul's right. They've been good, but not great. Like, they've shown, but they've shown at least that there is something that, has to be taken seriously by the time the Lions come down here in July. I think if you just keep growing, you keep sort of find that killer edge that's just been missing, that inability to take opportunities against Scotland, the last sort of 5-10 minutes against Ireland where they weren't able to close out games there, like that's just what's missing. And it's been missing from past Australian sides as well. So I feel like they've solved a lot of problems that they had in 23, but that's going to be the number one issue for 24. And as you look at the Lions tour, you're going to probably only have that Fiji test and that's it. So it's going to be a tough runway. But yeah, no, the Argentina game interests me because you look at, we've sort of talked about, well, let's call it how we say it. There's a cash grab that's going around rugby these days, whether it's at a club level or an international level. I just wonder if that warm-up game in Dublin is almost like a tester for a potential expansion of a Lions tour, where outside of the New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, whether they're going to look to potentially, they see how much money that the Lions tour makes. As much as they want this Nations Cup to be this money grabber, nothing outside of the World Cup rakes in more money than Lions. So I just wonder if this Argentina test is a way to sort of test the waters with something different, see if they can potentially, go from every 4 years to every 3 years, or just another way of just sort of making the Lions money go around, or realistically, it'd be probably more money for the Lions consortium or whatever sort of situation, partnership, whatever situation is between those home nations. But it's an intriguing test to kick off a sort of Lions tour, and not an easy one for a Lions tour as comparative to past games that they've maybe gone to Japan or opted to schedule another sort of club fixture instead.
Mm-hmm. As a final point for this pod, we've been kind of alluding to it throughout the chat, but we want to go back to Rugby World Cup 2027. We're looking ahead, first time back in Australia in over 20 years, and there will be some changes. There will be some changes, not just the fact that the world of rugby looks very, very different to how it looks 20 years ago, but changes in format, changes in setup. There's going to be an expansion to 24 teams, which is a notable change, and it opens up the door for many more of those emerging nations like your Chiles, like your Portugals to qualify. Personally, I think for me, it has felt like a natural progression considering the growth of the competitiveness of international rugby. It just makes more sense to have more teams in there. But Paul, of course, considering the space that you work in, this affects nations that you are very close with a lot more. How do you feel? What's the thoughts about it?
Yeah, no, we're very excited. I think this was inevitable because of Chile eliminating Canada and then defeating the US. I think that was it. World Rugby, no North American team. Once Portugal obviously qualified, no North Americans at the World Cup. So that was it. But not only that, a lot of the market potential is actually outside of a lot of the regular Tier 2 teams. What is the market potential of Samoa compared to Spain is one example. Do the investigation if you're in doubt. Yeah. So it's very exciting, though. I'm interested in, for example, we're going to have seeds this time. The brackets or the bands, instead of being of 4, because of 4 pools, now it's 6. So if you're ranked number 1 to 6 in the world, you have an advantage. So today, Argentina are in the top 6. Australia are not. So one good thing about Australia not being in the top 6 from your perspective is that Wales and Fiji are also not in the top 6. So we can end that constant of one World Cup after the next. So teams, the rankings, it just means that they're more important than prior, and very much excited not only in who qualifies, but I do think the round of 16 is going to be very exciting. For example, you could cruise through your pool, or you could scrape through your pool. You're in the round of 16. You could see a shock of, I don't know, Georgia or with Italy, Georgia or with Wales, for example. Very, very, very interesting. And importantly, it's not going to make the World Cup longer. and that's key because we've all had enough of frustrations based on the scheduling of matches. So, I mean, Argentina have had World Cups where they've had 3 days rest between matches, as an example, and that's more often than not was required of Tier 2 rather than Tier 1. They changed that for the last World Cup, and they did that by extending the World Cup, making it, was it too long? A lot of people said yes. But very much excited about the new format. And I'm excited, wanting to know what you guys actually think in terms of how is Australia going to host it? Where is the final going to be? I mean, if we were, how would you allocate different teams? Have you got specific markets in mind?
I think it's interesting when you look at, everyone sort of looks at the final to start with. So I guess that's a perfect way to sort of segment this in. Like, and I think in terms of World Rugby regulations, you can only host at Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, which is, I think that was sort of a perfect way to almost break down of there's probably three things that World Rugby is going to be wanting. But it's whatever's going to sort of rank highest on the priority. If you're going to Sydney, you're looking for sort of the best base for an entire World Cup. You're looking to, that will be where you do like probably your opening game and like where the majority of teams are probably going to be based, like just from sheer infrastructure facility. I would expect you have at least two of the pools based in Sydney, even one maybe up at Newcastle if they're going to that route as well. If you're going from Melbourne, you're going for the most fans. And I mean, the MCG for those is probably 100, probably getting 100, 110 potentially around that.
100,000 and like over 100,000 in that stadium, which would make it by far, if they sold that out, the biggest ever World Cup final in terms of attendance. It would be huge.
Which is amazing, but it's an oval ground. So in terms of, it'd be the biggest, but probably the worst spectator perspective, even though it is sort of banked up to an extent. Whilst Perth is probably your newest stadium and in the best time zone for everyone else. So if you're looking to appease the sort of stakeholders in the north, you probably go with Perth. But you're not going to appease many other people. And you talk of how you're going to balance it. If you probably got to put one pool in its entirety in Perth, and because that sort of if you're going to make people travel, east to west coast, like that's again, it's a longer flight than New Zealand, so it's going to be a rough ask. And those Super Rugby clubs in New Zealand know the pain and know how much you can actually take out of performance. So, like if you're looking for the balance of where those sort of six pools sit, I think you put maybe two in Queensland, maybe go one in Brisbane, one up in Townsville. I think Townsville, you look for maybe a bit more Pacifica feel to it with its proximity to Fiji, to Rarotonga, work out the best way to get those fans involved. Sydney probably ends up being your Australia base. And then you put in sort of Sydney or Brisbane become your Australia base. The other city hosts a big nation or like a New Zealand, something like that. And then if you say there's 4 out of 6 pools, I think your other one goes to Melbourne, and
probably sharing that with Adelaide as well, because you'd have AAMI Park, you'd have Docklands, the MCG, and then also there's Adelaide Oval, and they've got a comparable. They're relatively close by compared to other parts of the state as well.
Well, I was going to argue you maybe just put a pool itself in Adelaide just to try and grow. They're taking this AUNZ game out there, so I think taking one there is a no-brainer. Whilst Canberra probably is even though it's got such a sort of history of creating rugby stars in Australia, like the stadium is, 35 years old and is just not up to standard for a World Cup. So I think if you look for a format, if it was up to me, you'd go 2 in Sydney, 2 in Brisbane, and a Melbourne, Adelaide for your 6 pools. With your final, I mean, I'm biased being from Sydney. I'd still say Sydney, but I don't think. I think it's going to be between Sydney and Melbourne, and it's going to be what do you prefer? Do you prefer your broadcast experience in Sydney, or do you want more fans in Melbourne?
So how would you do with the round of 16? So you got 8 playoff matches.
Yeah, I think you probably have to go like Eastern Seaboard for that. You have to go Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, like Perth. Perth's a big ask for teams to fly over to, and I think if you go say 1 in Brisbane, 1 in Sydney, a Melbourne game, and then maybe the 4th up in Townsville's probably too small, so you probably go 2 in Sydney, one in Brisbane, 1 in Melbourne, probably. I don't know, Nick, how would you do it?
Well, yeah, it's a tough one because there's also Adelaide to consider as well in this regard, because Adelaide is not, if you were to spread them out, Adelaide is still a 50,000 seat stadium. Obviously, it's still an oval as well. It's not ideal, but it has proven itself to be a very good setting for rugby. The Wallabies and Springboks played a fantastic Test match there a few years ago in the Rugby Championship. I think Eastern Seaboard does make the most amount of sense. I mean, for Perth does have a couple of good venues, not just the Perth Stadium of 65,000. There's also NIB, where the Western Force play, which holds over 20. Which, you know, if you were to host that from a pool perspective, you could still host 2 matches in that city, generally speaking. But for the round of 16, I think it'll be the time where it'll be. There'll be fans around. They'll be wanting to be as close as they can to the games. The biggest venues in terms of closest proximity to one another would all be on the Eastern Seaboard. You've got the Sydney Football Stadium, which hosts 45,000. You've got Homebush, which hosts 83,000. Docklands hosts 50,000. Adelaide Oval 50,000. Lang Park 50,000. In terms of the pure spectacle, it will probably have to be those stadiums on the Eastern Seaboard. I feel like part of me also wouldn't mind just throwing it to the wind, spreading them all out in some way, shape, or form, depending on the actual fixtures themselves, because it would make sense if Perth suddenly it was to, as their final match, realistically speaking, get a quarterfinal fixture at Perth Stadium with 65,000, because fans will turn up. Fans in WA is a lot of expats. There's a lot of people from all around the world, and it has been consistently proven. Whenever the Wallabies take a Test match out there, the house full sign at Perth Stadium is frequently up. So in terms of an actual event and atmosphere in that stadium, that would also be a winner. So it's a tough one. The challenge of being in a country with multiple different time zones, and not only that, time zones that are very comparable to traveling internationally. It's a unique challenge.
Great.
I feel like as a last final point before we say farewell, Paul, because we always love having you on the show, and we always love hearing your thoughts and perspectives on international rugby, particularly from your side of the world. What do you think in terms of both, for example, Rugby Championship, all the status quo happening as a kind of leading into this World Cup? I mean, part of me has always wanted, at some point, for God's sake, take a Rugby World Cup to Argentina, and take a Rugby World Cup to South America. I think it would be phenomenal to see a Rugby World Cup not just spread in Argentina, but in Brazil, in Uruguay, in Chile. Surely the infrastructure is there for it. Will we see that happen? Because once you were called America's Oval 2027, you were banking on that 2027 World Cup going there, and part of me as much knows that while the economics will determine that they want to try and expand the game in the USA, and that will be where 2031 goes. In my head, they are you'd be mad not to take a World Cup to that part of the world at some point.
Sure. I think it's a question of when. There's no reason not to go there. They Las Pumas are a Southern Hemisphere team, and obviously, but not necessarily from the obvious standpoint, because, for example, Australia Wallabies will play relatively nationwide. All Blacks, Springboks, the same. It's not the case up north. Wallabies have only play England at Twickenham in London as one example. So Argentina play nationwide, and they get strong turnouts. The market's there. The prior experience hosting Soccer World Cup and the Copa America as well, very often. There's no reason to say the infrastructure is a problem. Buenos Aires is an ideal city as a hub to host. It's pretty accessible worldwide. I mean, direct flights to key markets in Europe, North America, direct flights via Sao Paulo to some other places. I mean, every time a team goes from playing Argentina to playing South Africa 1 week to the next, they have to use Sao Paulo as one example. But I mean, New Zealand have hosted the World Cup. You can't fly from somewhere like Nelson or Dunedin or Napier to to Australia. And I mean, Pumas did that. They went from playing in these venues to playing in Canberra, playing in Perth even. So the logistics side of Argentina is strong. The rugby side's very strong. The question is the economy, which has always been a point raised. The current president is fighting inflation very successfully, and there's reason to believe that the country's moving in a good direction. I see no reason to not to want to see a World Cup there. I think we want new places. We could always have England again. We can always have Japan again. South Africa obviously are not happy with missing out. But I mean, they have already had it in the past. Ireland's not happy with missing out again. They've already had it in the past, but they would say, well, no, we haven't. Well, yes, you have. You just haven't had the time. But you've participated, and that's the point. So I think Uruguay, Chile, getting them on board is an option. I'm not sure if it's a good one or not at this stage. It's viable. I mean, they both have the facilities. It's just a case of Argentina would not need them, but would it add to the event? I think that's a study to be analyzed. To be honest, I could see the pros and cons, but I mean, I would just be guessing at this point if doing that. But I don't think Brazil would be involved.
At the very least, it would give us a fantastic time zone in our neck of the woods, because there is few things better than waking up on. Nathan knows. Nathan knows. It's Sunday morning. Wake up at 8 a.m. to watch Argentina play is one of the biggest enjoyments of the Rugby Championship, because suddenly, like, it's not 1 a.m. when we have to cover rugby. It's the best.
So when you consider the context of the last 4 spring tour games have been, I think, 2 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and like maybe 12:30 a.m. Like, again, the Argentinian time zone's a game changer for us, or even that South American time zone's a game changer. So when we got that US World Cup coming up as well, it's going to be as good as well. So I'm excited to see how it all goes. I'm in grants. I think Argentina absolutely should, in some capacity, host certain games, if not the entire tournament.
We allow us to dream from a purely selfish standpoint from covering it, but Paul, it's always a pleasure having you on the pod. We love chatting rugby with you. And for everyone listening, go check out Paul. He's the co-founder of America's Rugby News. You can go check him out. We'll include a link in the description in this podcast. Also follow him, America's Oval, on Twitter. It's swear to God, one day we'll see him say Argentina 2025 or 2035 rather. When you change it up again. Paul, it's always a pleasure having you on, and we always love chatting rugby with you. Thank you so much, mate.
My pleasure.